Get off this yacht, you filthy nobody! The roar ripped through the warm night like a shotgun blast, silencing the music, freezing the laughter, and turning every head toward the deck's edge. Champagne glasses trembled in stunned hands. The glow of the yacht's lights burned against the black ocean, spotlighting the rage in her face, veins stretched, jaw clenched, pearls rattling against her throat. Then came the shove. Not a stumble, not an accident, a full, deliberate thrust from hands manicured for cruelty. Her heels scraped the polished teak, breath catching for the last time above water, and then gravity snatched her. Over the rails she went, dress billowing for a heartbeat before the cold. Black Atlantic swallowed her whole. Before we dive deep, I want you to do two things right now. Drop your country in the comments, because the world needs to see how far voices travel when we tell the truth. And if you're watching but haven't subscribed, smash that subscribe button and share this video. On Black Voice Stories, we don't just tell you about injustice, we take you to the exact moment it turns into pure justice. Now breathe in the salt, feel the deck tilt, and meet the woman they tried to erase. Her name is Evelyn Brooks, 34, Black American, corporate attorney forged by fluorescent, library lights, and the kind of exhaustion that turns ambition into discipline. She grew up tracking bus schedules and scholarships, learned to argue with case law before she learned to parallel park, and built a life so precise that even her grief fit inside color-coded calendars. Excellence had been her armor and her burden, polished 1,000 times by condescension that wore smiles like accessories. You know the look, polite, patronizing, pretending not to notice her until it needed what she knew. She wasn't on the yacht for champagne. She was there because she'd been hired to advise a capital deal with maritime assets, dry, language for wet money, and the owner, Charles Whitmore, old money white American billionaire with the conscience of a man who had seen two. Many auctions disguised as mergers, wanted her brain near his signature. Proximity to power breeds enemies, and envy wears pearls. Victoria Langford arrived with the dusk and the sea breeze, a woman cut from hard winters and harder entitlement. 52, white American, face sculpted into a permanent verdict. The unofficial gatekeeper of parties where the guest list always promised diversity and delivered decoration. She clocked Evelyn the way of customs. Officer clocks luggage it has already decided to open, and the evening began to tilt. On luxury decks, the first aggressions are always small, calibrated to pass as culture, a mispronounced name, the way a blade is mislaid on a table, a joke that lands where it wounds, a glance that measures and dismisses in the same blink. Evelyn logged them the way lawyers log exhibits, quietly, thoroughly, with the stillness of someone who has learned that rage is expensive and receipts are free. She watched the water peel moonlight into ribbons, felt the hum of engines trap the night in a low purr, and focused on the numbers that had brought her here. Liabilities tucked in shell companies, vessels flagged in nations whose laws fold on contact, and a clause she'd drafted that would finally insist on the thing no one expected from wealth, a line it wouldn't cross. Power doesn't forgive interruption. Victoria's orbit tightened with each hour, resentment fermenting into spectacle. Whispers gathered like gulls. Who invited her? What is she wearing? Is she with the staff? Is she paralegal? Is she safe? The questions weren't questions. They were permissions, stamped and passed hand to hand until one woman convinced herself she was defending a world that had made her important by keeping others small. The band hit a brass note big enough to hide a thought like treason. Evelyn set her glass down, pivoted toward the rail for air, and felt the subtle shift that becomes memory. The push, the loss of balance, the cold spike of terror as skin meets night and the sky spins. Then water everywhere, inside and out, a fist closing, a universe without oxygen, where sound is a rumor and time is just a long hallway without doors. Under the surface, the body forgets biography. Titles dissolve at the same speed as breath, and the ocean holds every insult at equal weight. Evelyn kicked, fought the panic that blooms like ink, counted in silence the way athletes count in pain. One for the childhood summers, where she taught herself to float. Two for the scholarships that said yes when odds said no. Three for the clients who learned that calm is loud when it has facts. Four for the mother who ironed uniforms while her bones begged her to sit. Five for the future that deserved to be told. Her lungs burned a color she didn't have a word for. On deck, chaos splintered into theater. Mouths formed ovals, hands covered shock. Phones appeared because nothing exists until it's witnessed. And Victoria's face stiffened into a portrait of self-defense rehearsals. The sea, impatient with cowardice, rolled its black shoulders. Charles Whitmore had been built by risk long before he could buy it, and some reflex deeper than Brand kicked him out of the freeze and into motion. Shoes hit teak, watch kissed the rail, jacket arced into the dark, and a man whose wealth had insulated him from consequence cut the distance to it head first. Cold taught him humility in a single second. The ocean disliked them both equally. A fairness Evelyn felt in her bones as a shape broke the black. Hands found an arm, and urgency chose mercy. Breaking the surface felt like birth through glass. Air ripped back in jagged gulps. The deck lights doubled, and voices layered into a single stupid question. What happened? As if hate were subtle. Ropes flew, arms extended, and bodies became pulleys for a woman who had carried too much before this night. The deck took her back grudgingly, water cascading into a halo that mocked baptism. And Evelyn lay, still long enough to feel the difference between dying and deciding not to. Paramedics think in triage and metrics, but Evelyn's metric was simpler. Alive meant unfinished. She sat, then stood, and nothing in her shook except the part that had learned. Long ago that survival is a verb. Blankets arrived, apologies didn't, and cameras devoured angles like carrion birds. Victoria rehearsed innocence, a choreography of concern and confusion, but bodies that shove remember the shove, and the deck had eyes. A steward, a violinist, a junior banker with more fear than loyalty. They had all seen the wind blow only one direction. The night refused to end. Police at the harbor, questions with teeth, statements that turned to transcripts. Charles moved between law and logistics, drenched, shaken, and awake in a way men get when their money fails to buy them. Back the hour they just lost. He didn't play savior. He signed the line that gave the footage. He named the shove as a shove, and he didn't let the yacht sleep until every person with truth had told it. Justice starts as paperwork and becomes a story, when someone cares enough to finish it. The video cracked across feeds by morning, the slap of the ocean louder than any denial. And America did what it always does with race and spectacle. It argued with itself in public while a black woman carried the weight in private. Evelyn refused to be an exhibit without a thesis. Silence has a frequency higher than outrage, and she tuned to it. While headlines bled, she built a case with the patience of erosion. Depositions under fluorescent light where entitlement shrank to fidgets. Maritime logs that time-stamped the exact hour when hate pretended to be gravity. Security footage stitched into a narrative, so tight even conspiracy couldn't find a crack. Victoria weaponized the usual nouns, reputation, misunderstanding wine, but physics and witness don't drink. And intent had carved itself into the angle of a shoulder, and the certainty of a step that pushes. Lawyers harvested adjectives until the court insisted on verbs. Push is a verb with consequences. There's a pivot in every story, where pain stops being the point and becomes the proof. For Evelyn, it arrived with a knock softer than pride, Charles requesting counsel. Not pity, not public absolution, just a ledger and a plan. Men like him don't apologize with words. They apologize by leveraging the system they built until it does what it was supposed to do. He cut checks that didn't buy silence. He cut ties that hurt. He cut a channel for truth through media stone. Most importantly, he seeded rooms, boardrooms, back rooms, rooms where power speaks in tax codes, and made space where Evelyn's voice echoed and then settled as if it had always belonged. The case concluded like thunder rolling away. Victoria's plea bargain shaped by the gravity of the fall and the weight of the watchful world. A sentence measured not just in time, but in a record that would follow her into the very rooms she used to police. Civil damages redirected like water under pressure, endowed. Funds for coastal rescue training with Evelyn's conditions stapled to the money. Grants for Black maritime law students. Because jurisdiction is a gate and gates need keys. A requirement that luxury licenses carry mandatory anti-harassment. Protocols that mention race, not as an aside, but as a hazard ignored at cost. But restitution is smaller than restoration, and Evelyn's spirit demanded the latter. She returned to the ocean, not for trauma rehearsal, but to teach her breath to trust her again. Mornings on a modest pier, wetsuit black as resolve. She learned the physics of fear until it became technique. A coach counted, the horizon listened, and slowly the water shifted from enemy to element. Endurance arrived as a quiet surprise. And one dawn, when gulls cut the air into lace, she swam beyond the echo of the shore and felt the world expand rather than shrink. That was the day she forgave the ocean. She didn't forgive the hands that had weaponized it. Vengeance would have been easy. Vision is harder. She built the Overboard Initiative, a nonprofit with a legal spine and a rescue heart. Hotline, counsel, training. Partnerships with ports that pretended luxury was harmless. A database where patterns appear when names line up. A map of the invisible injuries that never make the news. A curriculum for crews whose idea of safety had never included the women they served. She carried herself into conferences that looked allergic to sunlight and forced the agenda to learn her. Language. She wrote policy that read like refusal. She seeded internships that turned into jobs that turned into leaders. She funded swimmers in neighborhoods where pools had been replaced by blame. The billionaire? Men who wake up don't always stay awake, but Charles did. He signed away cushion and comfort, sold assets to fund a foundation that bored his peers and saved strangers. When critics accused him of theatrics, he shrugged the way a man shrugs. When he's finally tired of being a caricature, and he said yes to every discomfort that made the next woman safer. The price of his redemption was to stop narrating it. Fame tried to graft itself to Evelyn's skin. She declined most interviews, accepted the ones that let her define harm in complete sentences, and never took the microphone away from the people, who called the hotline and gave it meaning. If you looked for her, you found her not on red carpets, but on docks with clipboards and in courtrooms with binders, heavy enough to crush indifference. Power liked her less when it realized she wasn't a story, she was a standard. The night of the incident never stopped existing, but it changed shape. The scream became a study in projection. The shove a footnote in a manual called How Not to Die of Their Ignorance. The fall a hinge that swung the door toward a room, where she sat at the head of a table, that she didn't bother to polish. She learned to love the sound of waves again, this time not as threat but as metronome. There was a gala 2 years later where the guest list finally meant something. Uniforms and gowns in the same room, calloused hands shaking manicured ones without anyone calculating worth. A wall of framed certificates from coastal towns that had adopted policies. Born at a desk where Evelyn had once cried alone, the band played a song that sounded like a horizon. Somewhere between speeches, a young woman with salt still in her hair told a story about being pulled from dark water by a crew that had read a protocol that had her name in it. Evelyn listened the way a person listens to an old fear being pronounced dead. The law practice didn't disappear. It sharpened. She specialized in liability the way a surgeon specializes in repair, operating on contracts until they stopped bleeding women into the sea. Clients arrived with budgets, left with obligations. She never apologized for billing like a man who had never been doubted. She invested in women who refused to ask permission. As for Victoria, the world she'd curated closed like a fist. The invitations thinned. The friendly faces learned new definitions for risk. And the mirror gave back a version of herself that couldn't metabolize what it saw. Accountability is a flavor you can taste for years. When justice works, it doesn't gloat. It simply makes repetition expensive. None of this turned Evelyn into a saint. It turned her into a person who sleeps. Not every night. Not without the occasional wave breaking against the glass of a dream, but enough. Enough to wake with the kind of focus that rearranges days. Enough to answer messages from strangers whose courage is a relay baton. Enough to walk past expensive decks without tasting metal in her mouth. If you watched closely, you could see the body language of a woman who had decided that survival was the floor, not the ceiling. Shoulders easy, gaze level, smile when necessary, laugh when earned. She visited schools where children demanded numbers, not platitudes, and she gave them both. She told them what a lawsuit costs and what silence costs more. She said the ocean doesn't know your name, but policy can, and they wrote it down like a spell. Nights on her own small boat, the one she bought not to impress, but to practice. She'd cut the engine and let the water speak. Sometimes it said nothing. Sometimes it told her about the people it had kept and the people it had returned. She learned which stars keep time and which ones keep secrets. The horizon ceased to be a threat and became a promise written in a line. She could chase but didn't have to cross. This is the part where stories try to find a moral that fits on a bracelet. Evelyn refused that. She preferred instructions. Document everything. Swim toward light. Never accept the version of events told by the person who benefited from the darkness. Refuse the party if the party refuses your humanity. Take the room if the room is offered. Build a better room if it isn't. And because stories don't end where pain stops, but where purpose starts, there's one more thing. If you made it this far, you felt the cold water with her, you heard the scream, you watched the surface split. Don't leave that feeling here. Drop your country in the comments so the map of who's watching grows until no one can pretend they didn't see. Subscribe if you haven't, because this channel isn't theater. Black Voice Stories is a ledger, and every subscription is a line item that says we fund truth. Share this so the next party on the next deck meets a policy before it meets a headline. They pushed a black woman into the ocean to prove she didn't belong. She came back with a tide strong enough to move laws and men. She didn't need to own the yacht to change the sea. She didn't need their permission to breathe. And when the night is loud and the wind tells lies, remember the lesson the water taught her and now teaches you. Rage is a wave, but justice is a current. It doesn't crash, it carries. It doesn't ask, it moves. It doesn't end, it arrives, again and again, at exactly the shore where someone thought you would never stand. Outro. They tried to drown a story and birthed a standard. She turned one fall into a framework, one night into a network, one scream into a system that answers back. If you believe in stories that don't just expose injustice but escort it to the door, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and come back next week. We'll be here with another true reckoning, another life flipped right side up, another name that refuses to disappear. Until then, hold your breath only when you choose to, and keep your eyes on the line where darkness learns it can't keep you, because that line is moving, and you're part of the force that moves it.